our customer joint webinar with PacBio and Komprise. We have two great speakers. We have Jay Semstead, who's the Senior Director of Information Technology at PacBio, and we have Krishna Subramanian from Komprise, who is the co-founder and COO. So why don't we go ahead and get started with Jay, who's going to give us a little bit of a background around the challenges that they faced during the event, and then also, why they chose Komprise.
Great.
So Jay?
Yeah, pleasure for being here. Thank you for having me. So let me give you a little bit of background on the company. Pacific Biosciences was founded in 2004 in the heart of Silicon Valley. Pacific Biosciences is a leader in the next generation sequencing for DNA, which provides longer read lengths and higher accuracy than traditional sequencing, which commonly provides a smaller fraction of the sample genomic data.
So Jay, thank you so much for joining us. This is Krishna. We keep hearing that genomic data is continuing to grow really fast, that it's going to outpace even all the social media content, YouTube content. Can you give us some color on that and why that is the case?
Yes, absolutely. So the DNA is actually, the map of our genome is what actually creates us. It's not just us, but plants, animals, as well as, viruses, unfortunately, in some cases. So I actually have a good slide on this as we come in our medicine and also our understanding of life is that we want to find out what actually makes something work the way that it does or behave the way it does or even change the characteristics. So even if you look at some of the work that's been done on PacBio is, the Zika virus, but also is like something as simple as drought-resistant rice. So if you're in a place that doesn't have a lot of rainfall, but you need to feed people, then you need to actually learn how to turn on genes that would make a drought-resistant rice that it does exist. However, it doesn't have good fruit, right? It doesn't provide long grains. And so therefore, if you can combine the genes that makes a large grain with a drought resistance, then that allows you to create something. It is genetically modified, but it helps people in the end. Now, PacBio doesn't actually do that work. They provide genomic sequencers. There are investigators worldwide that use our sequencers for everything from viruses to healthcare to GMO to whatever they want to use it for. We're just the instrument provider. Think of it like a printer. People can buy a printer. Some people can print pictures. Some people can print counterfeit money or try to. So we don't weigh in on what people use them for.
Okay, so it sounds great. So it sounds like PacBio creates the genome sequencers.
That's correct.
And customers might use them for a variety of applications from agriculture to disease prevention to research, etc.
That's correct.
And what is the kind of data that these sequencers generate? And as you've been evolving your sequencers, how do you see that data changing?
So the data that it generates is actually genomic data, which doesn't really change unless it mutates or things like that. So it already exists in the sample itself. However, how we're getting that data, we're actually looking to drive the cost of sequencing down because it's been, actually, if you go to the next slide, I can show you here on the screen. Are you showing the next slide? Sorry, I can't see this. So so if you look at the from the beginning of time, the first Sanger sequencer in like 2001, the cost of that genome sequence would be incredibly expensive compared to the genome sequencing that we have today, and we see that it's going to continue to go down over time as technology evolves. And how you do that is you increase the amount of samples you can go through a high volume, high throughput sequencer. And so the amount of data that's coming off of the sequencers per run is staggering. And then now as it gets cheaper, then people are actually doing more and more sequencing itself. So then everyone, as you look at 23andMe or other companies that are out there, Genomic Health is another one that you can do personalized medicine with. You can go get your genome sequenced and analyzed.
So what is this graph actually showing us? And why is Moore's law on this graph?
Right. So genome sequencing data, is projected to grow at a minimum of doubling every 12 months. And that's the historic estimate. It is actually at 7 doubling every 7 months. So if you look at even the more industry estimate is even lower than the actual historical. So you see that it's growing significantly at every 12 months minimum, if not 7. PacBio and our customers are faced with massive data growth. Storage innovations and the storage densities that we're seeing in hard drives and solutions is not enough to solve the storage growth problem that we're having and our customers are having.
So it sounds like there's a gap, that data is actually growing even faster than what was historically projected, and there's a gap between just using more storage to address that problem.
That's correct.
How is that? I mean, this is a generic industry graph, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us, what this means to you and to Pacific Biosciences, as an example?
Well, it means more to the world,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. Just like every hospital and clinic. When you go to the doctor, and the next, is it going to be 1 year or 10 years when you go in there, they ask you for a genomic sample, or when you have a baby, they're going to do a DNA sequence baseline of your baby's genome. Then that's really going to see the consumer uptick on that genomic data. Is where you're really going to see that explode. I think from a Pacific Biosciences perspective, we are obviously managing the data. The data itself on the genomic side is very normalized through industry standards. So that is something called a BAM file, and so things are stored in a specific way that's compressed. However, we need tools to help them manage that. We actually see the throughput actually, with these hospitals and clinics and also industry having so much data that they're going through as they're doing, as the technology becomes practical to use for more and more drug discovery and such, and also in the clinic, you're going to see more and more data produced everywhere. And we see that inside of PacBio. And so what we see here is, if you look at, we've been around for 14 years, and year over year, we're seeing a 70% year over year growth. And that's inside the company. And what's driving that is really more throughput per run, because we're driving our costs down for each genomic sequencing. We have people that are coming up with new ideas, new ways to make the genomes more accurate, faster, and also we have things, even atom modeling, other things people are doing on the clusters that they're actually looking at how molecules will interact with each other at a real-time level. So when I came there about 2.5 years ago, there was 4 different storage solutions. One of those storage solutions, one vendor had 2 primary platforms because they had acquired another company and they were pivoting. And then the scientists, they were very protective of their data. They would rarely respond to any data initiative that we had, management initiative we had, and would rarely approve to move their data or touch their data because they didn't know if they would ever need it again. And that was really a giant problem for us. Like, how can, if they're not going to give us permission to touch it, then how can we do anything to manage that data? And so what would happen, it would lead to, like, okay, we're going to just buy more shelves, horizontally scale out, not horizontally, but vertically scale out our storage, right? And so then we have these islands. We had a fragmented namespace because we had, 4 different solutions. If we need more storage, maybe we buy, some new storage, another island, and then it's fragmented even more. And so this was just when walking in the door, it was just like, wow, this is going to require like a data initiative, that we're going to have to look at storage in a totally different way. We were, being asked from an IT perspective, just like everybody else is. Everyone's like, Moore's laws, it's there, sir, therefore IT budgets should be flat. The CFO's like, why should we be spending more? You guys should be fairly flat, do more with the same. And so we were actually started an initiative, and we piled a bunch of people in a room and started talking about what's going to be important so we can actually react and respond to that, to the business asks.
Mm-hmm. So some of the problems you brought up, Jay, is something we hear from customers regardless of what vertical they're in.
Yes.
It sounds like, some of the key things you brought up are, first of all, the data footprint is continuing to grow, but the IT budget is staying flat. So you're being asked to do more with the same, yet end users don't really want their data to be touched, or they don't want to lose access to their data. because for them that's a scary proposition, and they don't know when they will need data again. And in most environments, the status quo is just put everything on primary storage. And so the data is sitting on primary storage. It's getting probably mirrored on primary storage and backed up on primary storage. And so the footprint that you're managing is growing exponentially because, with every 1x of data growth, you're probably having 3 to 4 to 6x of the footprint that you're having to manage. Is that a good summarization?
Absolutely. And so it is that paramount problem that we're facing.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned something else that's interesting, particularly in scientific environments. You do have multiple environments. You have an HPC environment, and then you have traditional storage, and then you have user storage. So you have multiple namespaces that you're having to work across as well.
Yes.
And you're manually managing within each.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We did.
Okay.
And
okay.
That was the end of 2015.
Okay.
So in 2016, we got together and, like we said, piled in a room and said, what do we need to do to respond to the business ask, but also how can we find our time, we're spending our time managing our environment and not being available to the core business and focusing on the core business. Mm-hmm. And we really wanted to say, okay, we want to be core to the customer, be available to the customer, which is, engineering the business, but at the same time, provide everything that was required for us to do that and for them to actually have a better overall environment and using that environment. So a better experience, if you will. So obviously transparent global namespace. You want people to go to one place and manage it. The storage, what's in the back, it should be transparent to the user. Data available from all platforms. So we have high performance computing, Windows, Macs, Linux, everything. Optimizing the solutions. So that it's a desert for the competition. I think in IT, people are used to being a cost center, not a profit center. But really, everything we do touches the bottom line. And so if we're being asked to control costs, we are actually helping our actual profit or bottom line. So we want to make sure that no one else in the industry can given the same problem, could have a better solution for the business.
So you're saying IT could actually be a competitive edge for the business if IT is streamlined.
That's correct, and that doesn't always mean cost savings. And I would put that out there as sometimes is having applications waiting on IOPS and CPUs waiting on IOPS. It's not a good use of CPUs. Mm-hmm. So it has to be right size. But absolutely, there is a right solution for the right problem. It's that's what the next slide was. Next point was the CPU speeds. If you just buy large storage, it's going to be very slow. 16 terabyte drives. I mean, it all sounds great from a density perspective, but how many IOPS per drive can you get? Your mileage will vary based on what kind of concurrency you have and random access that you have. Mm-hmm. The solution we had because of the HPC part and the analysis part is we needed multi-tiers. We needed flash and SATA and tape and some cloud, and we wanted to make sure we could manage that all through the solution. And we typically find with the global namespace, there's a lot of storage providers that provide that global namespace and they do it very well. But then you're locked into their platform, and then you're not always getting the full capabilities that you need. It's just you're tied to what they have. And so we were looking at how do we do the multi-tiered solutions, but also not having to be fully locked in. You can get a story from providers, and it's a story, and then you're locked in. And if you have to move or be dynamic or agile and respond to something else, or a new technology comes out, and you never know. Like from an IT perspective, are you putting all your eggs in one basket? So that was an important thing as well. We provide storage usage reporting. This is a huge one. When we have the 4 different vendors in there, how do I provide a normalized report up to my CFO, who's my boss, and in a way that she can understand it, and where I can understand and have a financial conversation, a trajectory conversation, or even support of talking with engineering about how they can manage their data better, or come up with data retention policies that actually make sense to the business, and have a top-down conversation as well as the bottom-up conversation with engineering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, do more with the same budget, and then another one is, this is with the onslaught of like SSD and flash, and we're like, okay, if we're having this tier 1 storage, what usually happens is you fill it up with high performance, requirements, and everyone's really happy until it fills up, and then you have to buy more and buy more. Otherwise, you don't. Oh, sorry, it's full. All our flash is full, SSD is full. So having a system that could auto tier was also very important to us. So we didn't have to copy and move things around all the time, and that we could keep that high performance storage with the active content.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So one of the things, Jay, in how you were looking at your initiatives was you were trying to get a transparent namespace across different storage vendors, without having lock-in, right, and have a way that did not require cultural change for your end users.
That's
right?
correct.
And so that, you didn't have to go and necessarily create this data governance initiative or things like that, without having to ask for permission. You could manage where data lived, and there was no change to the end users and applications.
That's correct.
From their point of view.
That's correct. That said, I did want to mention the global namespace. We did have an exercise to create that through our primary storage vendor. Mm-hmm. And so we do have a primary namespace that we manage, I would say, our blue collar storage, the storage that we know we're always going to need and the most of, and that is our global namespace. So having Komprise and to leverage it in the way that it's actually intended, you need to have, it's good to have a global, you need a central place that you start from, right? And that you should take some time to make sure that's in good health and it's a global namespace and has the features you want, that then you can leverage Komprise on top to manage the rest. So a typical data lifecycle now, with Komprise, the Komprise is now a solution at PacBio to manage the data lifecycle. Data is generated and is analyzed on the fast storage. It is moved by access time policy, which is set at the share level. So it's per share. It doesn't have to be the entire storage server. And it's set at this share level to lower the cost to lower cost denser storage. So it moves it there after a short amount of time, period. After 6 months, the data is then, and then it moves to the more dense storage tier, which is our SATA tier on our global namespace. After 6 months, based on the access time, the data is then archived to tape storage, which is actually a Komprise target. So Komprise actually manages the movement of that data, not only from fast disk to higher dense disk, but also all the way to tape. And we can see it in the dashboard. Everything's managed within the Komprise dashboards, and it gives us the full view of our data and reports for IT ourselves as well as to business management.
And you made an important point that data has different kind of SLA through its life cycle. It has different value points through its life cycle. And I think one of the sort of aha moments for you in creating this initiative was to break the data life cycle from storage life cycle. Can you tell us a bit more on what you meant by that?
No, absolutely. So data obviously has its life cycle and its importance, and most people don't go and clean up their working files and project files. And so what ends up happening is the data lives on that server, and even if they cleaned up, the data would sit on there, most likely, if it's not programmatically managed by, if you're having your core IT people combing through files and managing it programmatically, where you're not making yourself available to your business, you're just combing through files all the time, or hiring a bunch of interns to do it, or program, write Perl scripts, if you will, to do it. It's literally going to probably just become a swamp, a data swamp. And then what happens typically is that storage server becomes aged and comes to a point where it's the maintenance contracts actually cost of them outweigh the cost of the storage system. And then becomes this health check. Okay, we need to move this data to somewhere else. We might buy yet another island. Then we have to have a project to migrate and delta copy and outages and orphaning data if we don't put all of it together. And it's just, it's the typical thing that most people have historically been doing for 30 years. Put the storage server in, everyone just fills it up, and we get another one, and then we migrate off when it's full or it's aged. And so the reason it happens that way is because we always have to ask permission. Can we move your data? You know, if we do move it, can we break it up? I mean, the active stuff from the not lesser active stuff, or the performant data from the less performant data. And most people are just really scared of people touching their data because they don't have to regenerate it, or it maybe just will impact their job, and just in general, if they ever lost the data, they're actually stewards of. They actually feel that they're the stewards of that data. So with Komprise, it's changed not only the whole landscape by being able to manage the data lifecycle instead of the storage server lifecycle. It removes the need to ask for permission. It's just transparent. It's transparent in the background. No one knows it's stubbed, and it dehydrates if it's been archived back to primary storage. And it's absolutely fantastic, so we don't have to ask permission and we can manage the data. What a lot of people on the user base don't realize, if you look at the storage performance of solutions today versus even 5 years ago, you know, people are, oh, it's going to go on slower storage. Guess what? It's faster than, or as fast as the fast storage we had 10 years ago. You know, and they're on Wi-Fi. You don't think a SATA drive can keep up with Wi-Fi connection? Of course it can. You know, if you're just dealing with office, it's high performance computing, or that really the concurrency, or a lot of random access for data modeling and things like that you really need the more specialized
storage. So this is
storage.
infrequently used, rarely accessed data, and you're not really going to see a performance degradation.
That's correct. And well, I guess what I'm saying is also is, as a senior director of IT, is I have a worry of anything that's going to impact my user base, and I can say to myself, actually, this other storage, the fact that it's SATA versus SSD, it's very rare that people would even notice. And when it rehydrated, it would be at full, unless I'm doing data modeling, which I would just rehydrate it before I brought it back to redoing remodeling. So it's really a low risk.
Okay. And so you've touched on a lot of these, but maybe you can kind of summarize what were some of the key reasons you chose Komprise.
Sure. So we actually got started because we met at a storage conference. Actually, I was waiting for the storage director to meet with him, and I saw your booth, and I said, I'll just see what you guys are up to. And we were going through, I just asked him to provide a normalized view of our storage capacity, because we were in October, we needed to put together a budget for the next year. And it's like, okay, it's going to take him a week or two to write Perl scripts, to dump it into databases, to sort and normalize and sum it all up. And that was just big block numbers. That's just, this is how much storage on these volumes, and this is the totals per storage servers. And it's because there was, in our data, there's a lot of little files, so it takes a long time to actually stat that many files. So that's why it would take a couple weeks to run in his time. And
you have petabytes of data, right, and billions of files.
At the time we had at the time we had just shy of 5 petabytes. We're at a little over 7 petabytes now. But the you know, in talking with you, you showed me the wheel and all the heuristics of the data, and it's like, oh yeah, we have this scale-out architecture, and it will do all that for you automatically. And we started with a POC, and we turned it on, and I couldn't believe it. Within like an hour, we started having data, and it wasn't just data; it was a conversation that I could actually have with my manager, because that was actually the audience for this report. Was not just, this is how much storage we have, this is how much was added in the last month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, how much is stale, 2 years plus 5 years, all that. And so it was a really good talking piece, because we were developing a new sequencer at the time, and it really showed in the last 6 months we had created over half of our data.
Wow.
Was new, because of the throughput of the new machine was 7 times the throughput of the last machine instrument. So it really was an easy, it's like, look, see, it looks like the engineering's doing their job. Look at all this data we created, and look at, this is how much is stale, this is how much money we can save, this is how much money we're going to need if we don't change our ways. So then we need to actually look at doing things a little differently, did the global namespace initiative, and then also the Komprise initiative to do that, as well as the tape initiative as well, the other tiers, if you will. And we've added also a cheaper disk layer as well in the mix now, so we actually have 4 tiers of storage, so we can really leverage Komprise even more. And so yeah, so it let us project this ROI that we're recognizing, and it was at 60% of our costs, of what we were spending year over year. We were able to change our management from the storage life cycle to the data life cycle. We didn't have to have all these meetings and chase people down to ask for permission to move data around and these health checks to move data. And it allowed us to scale for massive data management. There's some features on the roadmap of Komprise, like metadata tagging and other things that are really important to us from a LIMS perspective, laboratory information management system, where we could actually tie codes, if you will, from the laboratory experiment codes into metadata onto the environment if we actually wanted to make it extensible to that point. And the other is we're starting to use Komprise for data protection, because they do have a way to copy and move data. So we're using the copy feature, and an upcoming snapshot aware feature will be able to take consistency groups of snapshots or data and copy them to another place without having to buy replication software or to the cloud transparently. And it's all through that single pane of glass, through the dashboard, that will alert us if something's not been copied, or it will tell us how much is when it's been consistently moved. And so all based on policy.
Great.
So this is how we can stack policies. We have a policy for tiering, then we have another policy for copy over the same share. So we have one for tiering and one for BCP. So we really feel empowered.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jay. And what I'd like to do is quickly show, especially for some of our audience who haven't seen Komprise before, show them the features of the product with a quick demo, and feel free to chime in, Jay, as we go through the demo on some of the features that you leveraged, and we'll touch on them. So as Jay mentioned, Komprise is really simple to set up. It's just software, and Komprise runs as one or more virtual machines in your environment. So Komprise doesn't need any agents on your storage. It doesn't need any modifications to your environment. It doesn't need any dedicated infrastructure. All you need to do is bring up the Komprise Observer virtual machine in your environment and literally point it at storage. And once you do that, you will start getting insights into your data. And I'm actually going to show that with a demonstration here. Just as we did for Jay, this is something we can set up in your own environment. When you bring Komprise in, literally you would point it at your any storage you want to look at. And as Jay mentioned, in his environment, he had a few different primary storage vendors and an HPC cluster. So those were the things that we pointed Komprise at. And then you pick the shares that you want to look at through Komprise. And once you do that, within minutes, even on petabytes of data, you will start seeing analytics. And this is the wheel that Jay was mentioning. The first thing that Komprise shows you is a profile of your data by age. So in this example, we're looking at 5 shares across these filers. And on these 5 shares, we are seeing there's 195 terabytes of data. And we're seeing a profile of that data by age. How frequently has this data been used? And we can see that a lot of data hasn't been touched in over 3 years. Another 13% of data hasn't been touched in over 2 years, and another 26% in over a year. So about 52% plus of the data hasn't been touched in over a year plus. And as Jay mentioned, what was interesting in his environment is that the distribution was somewhat bipolar. I think there was like half the data that hadn't been touched in over a year plus, and then this light green data of what had been generated in the last 3 months was about 30–40% of the data, because it was rapid growth.
That's correct.
Based on the new sequencers, right? So you can get a profile of your data that way, and also you can see exactly how much more storage you would need if you did nothing based on your growth rates. So what this is showing you is that based on historical growth rates on these shares, this 195 terabytes is going to almost double in footprint if you did nothing. You're going to need another about 100 terabytes, about 88 terabytes needed to be added just to store the primary data. And I think you were telling me that this is all these dashboards you actually used with your CFO, and I actually went through the numbers with them.
Absolutely, she digested it instantly. It spoke to her. She had all the stats that she wanted to see. So it was a very easy conversation.
And the other thing this shows you is also a distribution of that data. So as Jay mentioned, in the genomics world, you have a lot of analysis data, and then they become BAM files, and then once they're BAM files, maybe they're not getting used as often. And you can actually see, how much data is where. And I think I remember when we did your analysis, we found that the bulk of your data was scientific data, as one would have expected, but this actually showed that. And the other interesting thing is, just as in PacBio's case, there are a lot of environments that have a lot of small files. And this shows you a distribution by size, so you can see how much data these different, by size, how much data they're consuming. So many times, even though you may have a lot of small files, cumulatively they may not be consuming a lot of space. So you can manage them differently than you would manage your larger files. And so this kind of file analytics gives you a better sense of the data. It also shows you who's using the data, which users, which groups, etc. So you can make intelligent decisions. And I think, as you mentioned, PacBio and most customers create different policy groups for different sets of shares and different users. And so essentially, once you see all this analysis, you can actually set your policies here. And before you even move any data or manage any data, you can get a what-if projection of how much this is going to save you, right? And this is, I think, what you were using in your planning. So, for example, you could say, well, maybe for my remote shares, I want to move anything over a year old, and you can pick your target that you want to move the data to. You could set cloud targets or on-premise targets. And as you change this, notice what's going to happen to the orange circle on the right and to all the numbers in the savings column. So if I move this to 1 year, I don't know if you noticed, but this went down to 59%. And it's saying that based on these policies, you're going to save 167 terabytes of capacity over 3 years. And to Jay's point, when you're moving that data out of the active footprint, you're not only reducing the primary space it's consuming, but you're also eliminating the copies on the primary storage. And so there's a secondary savings to that footprint, which we also show, and the cost savings. And all the numbers here are in a cost model that you can actually edit and set. Now, one question I have for you, Jay, when you did your pilot, you actually did point Komprise at your production data.
That's correct.
And sometimes customers wonder if they should do that or not. What was your experience, and how did Komprise's adaptivity work in your environment? Was there visible impact to your users, or?
There wasn't any impact. It actually auto-throttled. This was one of my concerns when we first spoke. Is like, okay, I'm going to turn this on, and what kind of load is this going to put on the systems? And I talked to the engineers that you guys have, and they said it's got the auto-throttling mechanism as it goes and does its crawls, and so if it's busy, it actually slows down. If it's not busy, it speeds up. So I've been very impressed with the core technology engines behind the Komprise product.
Great. Yeah, and as Jay mentioned, it does auto-throttle, so it runs invisible to your storage system, and typically it runs under about 3% of load, 3 to 4% of load on your filers. And I think in your environment, we actually measured that to be the case. So once you see all that analytics and you're happy with it, you can then actually have Komprise move and replicate data based on your policies. And as Jay mentioned, in his environment, they're doing both. You're moving data to lower tiers, and you're also replicating data to another location. And when we do that, the other thing Komprise does is it doesn't get in front of your data path. Jay talked about moving data without having to seek user permission. And the reason you're able to do that with Komprise is that Komprise is actually sitting behind your data path. So all the hot data requests, which is about 99% of the requests, go to the primary storage and is responded to by the primary storage, and Komprise is nowhere in that equation. Only when it comes to data that we have moved, only when those files get opened or read, only then does Komprise actually come into the picture. The primary filer calls Komprise, and we do this without using traditional static stub files. We use a technology called dynamic links, using the links that all the file systems natively support. So we're using standard protocol mechanisms to accomplish this. And the move data looks exactly as before. So this is showing you a folder before a move. This is that folder after a move. The files in the red rectangle have been moved. We put the red rectangle there so you can see what moved. But you can't really tell the difference. You know, they all look like they're there. They're part of that namespace. All their access control and everything is preserved. And users can open and access these files. And you can set recall policies on when data is brought back or left on the target and just cached locally. Okay. So some of the technical elements of the solution are that you don't require any storage agents, you don't need any dedicated hardware, you don't need any static stubs, there's no change to the hot data path, and there's really you don't have to manually manage the environment because Komprise automatically adapts to your storage and your network. It slows down if those environments are in active use, and it speeds up when they're not. And there are no scaling limits. So I think in your environment, from POC to production, you just added more observers to make that change. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we have it set up in a full HA, so it's a scale-out architecture, fully clustered. The Komprise solution, which was actually a requirement for us. So we're glad that you had it out the gate.
Yep. Exactly, and so you have multiple observers providing fault tolerance to one another. That's a good point.
Yeah, it was built that way from the ground up.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, as Jay mentioned, there is no lock-in to an environment because you can natively access the move data from the source or the target. Actually, that's one thing. Sometimes customers wonder, if I use Komprise and then I want to turn it off, what happens? And all the data is sitting on the customer's storage and it's directly accessible from their storage, right? Was that also a consideration for you?
Yeah, it was a consideration, and so I asked if there was a unwind utility, and there is. So
yes, there's a way to recall all the data back, or you can directly access the data from either environment.
Yeah, so you can still use rsync or xcopy or any of those tools, or robocopy, or you can use the unwind from Komprise, either one.
Yeah. Great. So I just want to kind of summarize very quickly, and we want to make sure we leave some room for Q&A. So it sounds like in your environment, we're getting about a 60% reduction in the cost, and as you said, it's not that the budget is shrinking, it's more that you've been able to offset the 28x growth that you're getting on your data without having to increase the budgets, right?
That's correct. The budgets are not shrinking. I made sure that my boss understands that as well, because the data is just enormous. And so that would be the wrong direction to take her down, because I wouldn't be able to do it. But this allows us for me to present something that she knows is that we're doing the best practice we can to be in line with business initiatives and being that end-to-end solution that no one else could do better in the industry as far as getting the most performance, as well as getting the right tier for the data, managing the data, and not distracting our engineers. So it's been a win across the board.
That's great. So at this point, we would love to open it up to some questions. We talked through a lot of the takeaways, so I'm not going to repeat them here. But one thing I did want to mention before we open it up to questions is that if you are interested in trying this in your own environment, we do offer a free trial of the product on a subset of your data, so you can actually write everything that I showed you, including moving data, you can test in your own environment, and you can see it for yourself, and you can get visibility into your data. That's how you started with us, right? And then if you're interested, you can do more with the product. So with that, Monica, do we have any questions on the line? And Do people just type in the questions in the chat
they
window?
can, in the question pane or in the chat window, but we did have a couple of questions that came in. So let me start with one question for you, Jay. So it's kind of a two-part question. Did you have any insights into your data before you started to work with Komprise? And the second part is, how much did Komprise help you provide insights into your data?
Yeah, so like I said, we had 4 different vendors, and the storage director did not have any up-to-date stats. Just overall, your typical, what's the usage statistics off of a volume and a share. And that's all they had. They didn't have any, what file sizes, who was using them, how old they were, any of that information. And so that's how we got engaged. Is I was asking him to do that, and I was like, oh, wait a second, there's a product here that will do it in minutes. Even if I just turn on the POC, will give us this data, and he can not have to worry about doing that. And so it provided all of that data literally in hours of having the VM. I was actually shocked. I was actually asking the engineer, Komprise engineering, it's like, you tapping into I know maps. I mean, what are you doing something special on the back end to be able to get that much data without creating a high level of load and IOPS on the system?
Okay, great. So let's ask one question here for you, Krishna. Can Komprise be used to analyze production file shares in a POC?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we talked about, that it does adaptively throttle back. So there is no change to your production environment, and there's no disruption to user activity in the environment when you use Komprise.
Okay, so we only have a minute left, so I think we should close. We'll answer some of the other questions that came in via email. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining the webinar. And as Krishna mentioned, if you're interested in having your data assessed, please go to komprise.com and sign up for a free assessment. Thank you very much, and this concludes our webinar for today.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you so much, Jay, for joining us.
Pleasure.